Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into a concept that I think you'll find really interesting. It's called commitment devices.
It's a fascinating
And we've
area.
got some really uh, interesting research and real-world examples to kind of unpack here.
Yeah, it's a topic that touches so many parts of our lives,
Yeah.
and I think you'll find it really insightful and surprisingly practical as well.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's get into it.
Okay.
So, first things first, what exactly are commitment devices?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and even the experts have a little bit of trouble kind of landing on a single concise definition.
Right.
The authors of that annual review of economics article that we sent you actually point that out. But
Right.
the core idea is this: a commitment device is a way to restrict your future choices
Okay.
in a way that aligns with your long-term goals, even when your present self might be tempted to stray.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so it's not just about making a plan. It's about putting something in place that makes it harder to deviate from that plan.
Yeah, exactly. And the key is that you're choosing
Okay.
to impose that restriction on yourself
Right.
because you anticipate that your future self might not have the same willpower
Right.
or clarity of mind as you do right now.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that feeling of knowing what's best for me in the long run,
Yeah,
but then getting sidetracked by immediate temptations.
absolutely.
It's like my present self is constantly setting traps for my future self.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And economists describe this phenomenon as time inconsistent preferences.
Time inconsistent preferences. Okay.
Okay. Basically, the idea that what we want in the present moment
Yeah,
doesn't always align with what we want for our future selves.
right.
Think of it this way: $10 today often feels more valuable than $12 next week, even though logically it shouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's like that instant gratification monkey on our shoulder,
Right.
always trying to steer us towards the quick reward,
Exactly.
even if it means sacrificing something bigger down the road.
Precisely. And that's where commitment devices come in.
Yeah. Okay.
They're a way to outsmart that impulsive part of ourselves
Okay.
and tip the scales in favor of our long-term goals.
So it's like a way to give our future selves a helping hand, even when our present selves are feeling a little weak.
Exactly. And the good news is there's a whole spectrum of commitment devices out there,
Oh.
from those that are very strict and restrictive to those that are more subtle and psychologically driven.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so tell me more about these different types of commitment devices. What are some examples?
Well, one way to categorize them is as either hard commitments
Yes.
or soft commitments.
Hard and soft. Okay.
Hard commitments are the ones that make it physically impossible or
Right.
extremely difficult to break the commitment.
Got it. So like those apps that block distracting websites while you're trying to work,
Yes.
you're literally removing the option to go down that rabbit hole.
That's a great example. Other hard commitments might involve physical barriers or consequences.
Mm.
For example, a person trying to quit smoking might give their cigarettes to a friend, making it impossible to access them easily.
Okay, those are some pretty hardcore strategies.
Right.
What about the soft commitments? What do those look like?
Soft commitments rely more on psychological mechanisms and social incentives.
Okay.
Think of things like publicly announcing your goals,
Yeah.
joining a support group,
Okay.
or using a financial commitment app like Stick,
Stick.
where you actually put money on the line if you don't follow through.
Oh, wow. Putting money on the line, that would definitely add some extra motivation.
Right.
It's like you're creating a consequence for yourself, even if it's not a physical one.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that these softer approaches can be surprisingly effective.
Really?
They tap into our desire to avoid loss,
Okay.
maintain a good reputation,
Uh-huh.
and follow through on our promises, especially when those promises are made to others.
So even though they're not physically preventing us from engaging in the unwanted behavior,
Hmm.
they're creating a stronger internal motivation to avoid it?
Precisely. Now, to really see how these commitment devices work in the real world, let's dive into some case studies.
Perfect. I'm always up for a good story, especially when it involves people outsmarting their own bad habits.
Well, one area where commitment devices have been particularly successful is in helping people save money.
Okay.
There's a fascinating example from developing countries called RSKAs, Rotating Savings and Credit Associations.
RSKAs. Okay, I've never heard of those before. What are they?
Essentially, it's a group of people who agree to contribute a fixed amount of money to a common pool
Okay.
at regular intervals.
Right.
Each member then takes turns receiving the entire pool of money.
So it's like a rotating savings club.
Exactly.
I can see how that would create a strong incentive to keep up with your contributions.
Right.
You don't want to be the one who lets the group down.
Exactly. And research has shown that these RSKAs can be incredibly effective in helping people save, especially in communities where formal banking systems are less accessible.
It's like a built-in support system and accountability mechanism.
Right.
You're not just saving for yourself, you're saving together.
Right. And that social element is a key part of what makes many commitment devices so powerful.
This is fascinating.
Yeah.
Are there other examples of how these devices are being used to help people achieve their financial goals?
Absolutely. Microcredit, those small loans often used to start businesses in developing countries,
Right.
has also been explored as a type of commitment device.
Oh, interesting.
It's a bit more controversial,
Okay.
but researchers like Rutherford have suggested that the regular repayment schedules
Okay.
and potential consequences for defaulting can act as a powerful incentive to save.
Like borrowing money to force yourself to save. That's a pretty interesting way to look at it.
It is, and it highlights how commitment devices can be used in creative ways to address all sorts of challenges. Now let's move on to another area where these devices have been particularly impactful: smoking cessation.
Okay. This is what I'm definitely interested in hearing about. My uncles have been trying to quit smoking for years,
Right.
and it just seems like such a constant battle.
It's a struggle many people face. The statistics are pretty staggering. 74% of smokers want to quit, but less than 5% of quit attempts actually succeed.
Wow. That's a really low success rate. It really shows how powerful those nicotine cravings can be.
Exactly. But there's hope.
All right.
Researchers have been experimenting with commitment devices to help people break free from those addictive patterns.
Mm-hmm.
One really innovative program is called CARES, and it was tested in the Philippines.
What is the CARES program all about?
It involves smokers depositing money into a savings account,
Okay.
but there's a catch.
Okay.
They can only access that money after passing a nicotine test 6 months later.
Oh, that's clever. So it's like they're putting a future reward on the line to incentivize a present behaving change.
Exactly, and the results were impressive.
Okay.
Smokers who were offered CARES were 3% more likely to quit compared to the control group.
That's significant.
Yeah.
It shows that even a relatively small financial incentive tied to a future goal can make a real difference.
It really is a testament to the power of well-designed commitment devices.
Yeah.
And speaking of clever designs, there's another intriguing study that was done in Kenya about fertilizer use.
Okay, this one sounds interesting. What do they do with fertilizer and commitment devices?
Well, researchers offered farmers a choice between an immediate discount on fertilizer or a delayed one,
Okay.
but the delayed one was a much larger discount.
So it was a test of their patience, right? Did they opt for the bigger delayed reward?
You might be surprised to hear that many chose the immediate discount, even though it meant foregoing a larger one later.
That seems counterintuitive. Why would they choose the smaller reward?
The researchers believe that the farmers were using the immediate discount as a way to pre-commit to investing in fertilizer for the next planting season.
Oh.
By getting it out of the way early,
Okay.
they were overcoming the potential for procrastination or short-term financial pressures that might arise later.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So they were actually using the smaller immediate reward as a way to ensure they followed through on their long-term plan.
Precisely. And it demonstrates how commitment devices can be used in all sorts of unexpected contexts, not just for things like saving or quitting smoking.
This is incredible.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see commitment devices everywhere now,
Right. Once you understand the concept, you start noticing it in all sorts of everyday examples.
like buying concert tickets in advance to make sure I actually go, or prepaying for a gym membership to guilt myself into working out.
Exactly. Those are perfect examples of how we use commitment devices, often without even realizing it.
Right.
We're creating those pre-commitments to help ourselves stay on track and achieve our goals.
This is all so fascinating, but I'm curious to go a bit deeper.
Yeah.
Is there any scientific evidence to support this idea that we have a dual self, the present self battling with the future self?
There is. Neuroscience is actually starting to provide some really interesting insights into how our brains work when it comes to making decisions, especially those that involve delayed gratification.
Okay,
Right.
tell me more. What's going on in our brains when we're trying to resist temptation?
Well, it turns out that different parts of our brain are involved in impulsive desires versus self-control. It's like a constant tug of war happening inside our heads.
No wonder it feels so difficult to make good choices sometimes. It's like we're fighting against our own biology.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the fascinating things about commitment devices, especially those soft commitments we were talking about,
Yeah.
is that they can work by reducing the cognitive load.
Okay.
or temptation that our impulsive brain has to deal with.
So it's not just about changing our motivations, but about actually influencing how our brains process decisions.
Exactly. There was a really interesting study done by Shiv and Federican where they asked people to remember either a 2-digit number or a 7-digit number.
Okay, so far so good. But what does this have to do with resisting temptation?
Well, after asking them to remember the number, they offered them a choice between a slice of cake and a bowl of fruit salad.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I'm already picturing myself reaching for that cake.
Well, the researchers found that the people who had to remember the 7-digit number,
Okay.
the ones whose brains were already working hard,
Right.
were significantly more likely to choose the cake over the fruit salad.
So their brains were too busy remembering those digits to put up a good fight against the temptation of that delicious cake.
Precisely, and this is where the connection to commitment devices comes in.
Okay.
By using soft commitments, we can essentially offload some of that mental effort, making it easier to make the healthy or more desirable choice even when our willpower is feeling depleted.
It's like giving our future selves a break, a mental shortcut, so they don't have to wrestle with that temptation in the heat of the moment.
Right.
I love how this is all coming together.
It's a really fascinating area of research.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the power of understanding our own psychological tendencies and using that knowledge to our advantage.
This has been incredibly enlightening.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a lot more informed about commitment devices now,
Good.
but I'm also realizing how much more there is to learn.
Oh, there's always more to explore.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a good place to pause for now.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground already, from defining what commitment devices are
Right.
to exploring their psychological underpinnings and real-world applications.
I agree. This has been a lot to take in. I feel like my brain is already buzzing with all these new insights and ideas.
We'll let those ideas simmer for a bit, and we'll pick up this conversation in part 2.
Okay. Sounds good.
We've still got more case studies to explore,
Right.
and there's a whole other dimension of commitment devices that we haven't even touched on yet.
Ooh, you've got me intrigued. I can't wait to dive back in.
All right, see you then.
All right. Welcome back.
All right, I'm ready to pick up where we left off.
Good.
I was thinking about all that stuff we talked about before the break, especially those fascinating studies showing how our brains
Yeah.
can be tricked into making impulsive choices when they're overloaded.
Right. Like that cake versus fruit salad experiment.
It really highlights how even subtle factors can influence our decisions.
Totally.
And that brings us to a really interesting angle on commitment devices, the neuroscience behind it all.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that neuroscience is starting to shed light on how commitment devices work in our brains.
Absolutely. So, we know that different parts of our brains are involved in different types of decision making.
Okay.
You've got the more impulsive emotional systems, and then you've got the more deliberative rational systems.
Right.
And they're often in conflict, especially when it comes to those choices that involve short-term gratification versus long-term goals.
So it's like that classic battle between the angel and the devil on our shoulders, but playing out in different regions of our brains.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that commitment devices, particularly those soft commitments that rely on psychological mechanisms,
Yeah.
can actually influence this neural tug of war.
Oh, wow. So they can actually change the way our brains work?
Yeah. In a way, yes, they can help to strengthen those neural pathways associated with self-control and long-term planning,
Okay.
while weakening the connections to those impulsive reward-seeking areas.
So it's like we're training our brains to make better choices, almost like building up a muscle.
That's a great analogy. And the more we use those commitment devices, the stronger those neural connections become, making it easier to resist temptation and stay on track.
That's so cool. It gives me hope that even if I'm prone to impulsivity,
Yeah,
I can actually rewire my brain to be more disciplined.
absolutely. And that brings us back to the power of those soft commitment devices by creating external instructions and incentives.
Yeah.
We're essentially providing our brains with the support they need to make those better choices. It's like we're outsourcing some of that willpower to our environment.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like instead of relying solely on our internal motivation,
Right.
which can fluctuate,
Yeah,
we're setting up external systems to keep us on track.
exactly. And the beauty of these soft commitments is that they're often very flexible and adaptable. Right.
We can tailor them to our specific needs and goals.
Okay, so for someone like me, who tends to struggle with procrastination, a soft commitment might be something like joining a writing group, where I have to share my progress every week.
That's a perfect example.
That way I'm accountable to others, not just myself.
Right, or if you're trying to stick to a budget, you might set up automatic transfers to a savings account.
Uh-huh.
so you're less tempted to spend that money impulsively.
These are great ideas. I'm starting to get really excited about the potential of these commitment devices to help me achieve my goals.
That's great to hear, but it's important to remember that while commitment devices can be powerful tools,
Yeah.
they also come with certain considerations. It's not just about finding any old commitment device and slapping it onto a problem.
Right.
We need to think carefully about how these devices are designed and implemented and who's controlling them.
That's a really good point. I can see how things can get tricky if these devices are used without a person's full consent or understanding. Exactly. For instance, imagine a scenario where an insurance company offers lower premiums to customers who are fitness trackers,
Okay.
but then uses that data to penalize those who don't meet certain activity levels.
That definitely feels like a violation of privacy.
Yeah.
It highlights the need for transparency and ethical guidelines around the use of these devices,
Right.
especially as they become more sophisticated and integrated into our lives.
Absolutely. We need to be very cautious about those slippery slopes where well-intentioned nudges can turn into coercive tactics.
I'm also wondering about the effectiveness of these devices in the long run. What happens if someone relies too heavily on external motivators? Do they ever develop their own internal sense of discipline?
That's a great question, and it's one that researchers are still exploring. There's some concern that over-reliance on commitment devices might hinder the development of intrinsic motivation.
So it's like if you always have someone telling you what to do, you might never learn to make those decisions for yourself.
That's one way to look at it. However, there's also evidence that commitment devices can actually serve as a stepping stone towards developing stronger internal self-regulation skills.
How so?
Well, by consistently using those external supports, you're creating a pattern of successful behavior. And as you experience the positive consequences of those choices,
Yeah.
you're more likely to internalize those values and develop a stronger sense of self-efficacy.
So it's like those commitment devices are giving you a taste of what it feels like to be successful.
Right.
And that success can then fuel your own internal motivation.
Exactly. It's like a positive feedback loop. The more
Yeah.
you succeed, the more confident you become, and the more likely you are to keep making those positive choices, even without the external support.
That's really encouraging.
Right.
It means that even if we start out relying on those external crutches,
Right.
we can still develop our own internal sense of discipline over time.
Precisely. And it speaks to the flexibility and adaptability of commitment devices. They can be used in a variety of ways, depending on the individual's needs and goals. Sometimes they might be a short-term solution to help us get over a hump, while other times they might be a more long-term strategy to maintain healthy habits.
This is all so fascinating. I'm
Yeah.
really starting to appreciate the complexity and nuance
Yeah.
of this topic.
Me too. And we're only just scratching the surface. There's so much more to explore when it comes to the ethical considerations,
Yeah.
the neuroscience, and the future of commitment devices. But maybe it's time for another quick break.
Okay.
Give our listeners a chance to process all this amazing information.
Great idea.
Yeah.
I know I need a moment to let all these insights sink in. We'll be back soon with more fascinating discussion on commitment devices. Welcome back to the show where we're talking all about commitment devices.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Before the break, we were talking about the potential downsides
Right.
of relying too heavily on these external motivators.
Right. We were discussing that balance, between using these tools effectively
Yeah.
and making sure we don't become overly dependent on them.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot
Exactly.
where the commitment devices are supporting our growth
Right.
and helping us develop our own internal compass rather than becoming crutches that we can't live without.
Exactly. It's about empowering ourselves, not becoming slaves to our own strategies.
Right.
And that brings us back to those ethical considerations we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
As these devices become more sophisticated and integrated into our lives, it's crucial to have these open and honest conversations
Yeah.
about their potential impact.
I'm thinking back to that example we discussed about the insurance company using fitness tracker data
Right.
to penalize customers.
Mm.
That felt like a pretty clear overstep.
Yeah, it definitely raised some red flags.
Yeah.
It highlights the importance of transparency and consent when it
Yes.
comes to using these devices.
Yeah.
People should have a clear understanding of how their data is being collected and used, and they should have the power to opt out if they feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about respecting individual autonomy
Yes.
and making sure these devices are used in a way that benefits people, not exploits them.
Right. And that responsibility falls on all of us, the developers, the policymakers, and the individuals using these tools.
Right.
We need to be thoughtful and critical, asking those tough questions about potential unintended consequences.
Absolutely. So speaking of the future, where do you see this field heading in the next few years? What kind of innovations can we expect to see?
Well, with technology advancing at such a rapid pace, the possibilities are really exciting.
Yeah.
We're already seeing a surge in the development of apps and wearables. They
Okay.
use AI and machine learning to personalize commitment strategies.
So imagine a fitness app that not only tracks your activity, but also learns your patterns and adjusts its prompts and rewards based on what motivates you best.
Exactly. Or a budgeting app that analyzes your spending habits
Okay.
and suggests personalized saving challenges tailored to your financial goals.
That sounds incredibly powerful,
It is.
but it also raises some concerns about data privacy and algorithmic bias.
Hmm.
We need to make sure these technologies are being developed and implemented in a way that is fair, equitable, and respects individual rights.
I completely agree. It's going to require collaboration across disciplines, ethicists, psychologists, technologists, policymakers,
Mhm.
all working together to shape a future where commitment devices are used responsibly and effectively.
It's an exciting time to be exploring this field.
It is.
And as we wrap up this deep dive,
Hmm.
I'm curious, what's the biggest takeaway you hope our listeners are walking away with today?
I think the most important message is that we're not simply at the mercy of our own impulsivity or willpower.
Okay.
There are tools and strategies we can use to bridge that gap between our intentions and our actions
Right.
and help us create positive change in our lives.
I love that. It's a message of empowerment, of
Yeah.
taking control of our own destinies. And it's a reminder that we don't have to do it alone. Whether it's through social support technology or clever psychological tricks, there are ways to outsmart our own bad habits and achieve those goals that matter most to us.
Beautifully said.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all these incredible insights.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope you've learned something new and feel inspired to try out a commitment device or two in your own life.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Until next time, stay curious and keep those commitments strong.
Take care.